All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Kristina Mand-Lakhiani here with me on the show. Kristina is a speaker, artist, and entrepreneur who co-founded the influential publishing company Mindvalley, as well as author of the forthcoming book, Becoming Flawsome. Hello, Kristina. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hi, Brandon, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This is definitely looking forward to diving in. You got a big smile for me when I saw the title of your forthcoming book, so I look forward to hearing all about that. But before we dive in, I would like to start with my cliche opening question, which is this: You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't
I just
answer?
wouldn't.
You
No,
just
no.
stare down?
I'm a. v- I would be puzzled and sort of wonder why she's asking questions like that and who she is.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. That's funny. I have not got that answer before. Most people are excited to share their passion, but it's a secret.
yeah, yeah, but who do I share it with?
Well, in this case, the woman in the elevator.
Also, also, I am a little old-fashioned. I believe in a little bit of small talk before we go dive deep.
Got it. Got it.
I know
You
it's
want to
an
date
it's
first. I got it.
I know it's not a popular reply, and nowadays everybody insists that we have to go straight for passion, but that's not my style.
Okay. Fair enough. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, if you had to sum up in a minute or so,
hmm
to give people who are tuning in just a sort of a high level what your highest excitement and passion is. Um,
Mm.
do we know each other
I have,
enough yet for
yeah.
you to answer?
These are different circumstances. You have the right to ask whatever you like.
Fair. Okay. Well, inquiring minds
I
would love to know.
well, I actually do have a lot of passions, and I have a big project which is launching my book right now, which takes up a lot of my time. But in addition
Hmm.
to that, as you read up my bio, I have so many different sites. So in addition to that, I'm a farmer. I am building a museum. I have my children who are growing up a bit too fast.
Yes,
So
that's how
I'm
it
very
works.
passionate about balancing all of that and
Hmm.
not falling into one over the other.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
hope it qualifies for an
That
answer, although I did evade again a little bit.
we'll let you out of the elevator on this one. Good enough. If you would, Christina, share whatever feels relevant to sort of set the stage for this conversation
Mhm.
regarding your backstory.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
love to hear.
so considering the circumstances, I would say that what makes it relevant is that I'm a co-founder of one of the biggest companies in personal growth and transformation,
Hmm.
Mindvalley. So obviously, I've been in the industry for 20 years, and we can talk any topic there. And of course, my book, which is about self-love and self-acceptance. So these are the two topics that I usually talk about.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I can talk about other stuff too, about
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, parenting, traveling, you name it.
How did you end up? I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people tuning into this show will have heard of Mind Valley,
Mhm.
and I'm curious. I mean, obviously, a big success has helped influence and um, you know shift perspectives. I guess you could say. For a lot of people around the world, and yeah, I'm curious how you ended up on that unique journey. I mean, when did your own journey with self growth and spirituality, et cetera, begin?
It wasn't my own journey in the very beginning, so I ended up there by accident and reluctantly because I started my work in government in Estonia, and that wasn't my career choice.
Mm-hmm.
I married at the age of 25, moved to US, had to start everything from zero,
Wow.
and I also wasn't allowed to work because my visa didn't have that clause attached to it, so I was not
Got it.
allowed to work. So yeah, my then husband Vishen was starting this business on the side of his day job, so that was the best thing I could do, help him. That's how I
Got it.
ended up.
Wow. Yeah, and it really. Um, did you go? Did you go from sort of the beginning on the side, helping your husband to obviously it became a wildly successful
Yeah.
publishing company. How long was that transition?
Well, Mindvalley has been around for a long time, and of course, it has changed and evolved, and it hasn't been the same from the very beginning. It had different phases. My journey, of course, I wouldn't be myself if I wasn't obstinate and still trying to find my own path and still believing that husband and wife shouldn't be doing the same. So it took me a few years before I fully focused on Mindvalley. I think we started in 2003. I started giving close to 100% of my attention to Mindvalley in 2009, so 6 years later.
Gotcha. And then, of course, it's now led to this is your first book, your
Yes,
upcoming book. Yeah.
yes.
I love the name. Tell us a little bit about, Becoming Flawsome and what that's all about.
You can't really tell a little bit about Becoming Flawsome. It's a full journey. It's like,
Okay. Tell a lot of it.
a lot about it. The book or the journey itself, because the book and the journey are two different things. The book is my self-expression. The journey is something which I believe a lot of people are on.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to hear both personally.
So, I'll start the easy one then, I guess. Having been in personal growth for such a long time, obviously, it was given that I would have to write a book eventually. Although I wouldn't write a book until I was ready. I also do consider myself a writer. So I've been writing, although mostly short form, for a really long time. So and then COVID happened and we all were stuck at home, and I had a lot of time on my hands, and I sat down and I finally wrote the book. So that's the journey of the book. Now, the story of Becoming Flawsome is, it's literally, it's a journey of coming back to your true self. I believe that a lot of people, when they grow up, they lose sight of themselves at some point, and they get lost, and they live life, but not necessarily what they want to do and what it means to be themselves. So that journey is about finding your way back to you.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And it's not an autobiography by no means. You wouldn't really piece my story together from the book.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just the title says a lot, that we all are flawed in some way. I assume you're suggesting there, and that
I don't usually profess truth, but this I know for a fact.
Yeah, right.
Everybody is imperfect.
Yeah, I always say we're perfectly imperfect, and I think that's a good way to really, just to approach understanding that yes, we're here to grow, we're here to expand, and all the imperfections. I mean, sometimes you see something that's really perfect and it's kind of like creepy, or it's not always the best thing for something to be, even aesthetically like perfect, but yet when there's like a little flaw in it, it gives it character. Would you agree?
Well, I don't think perfection is very natural. Nature is imperfect.
Right.
If you look at nature, there's a lot of imperfection in it, and I think that's what drives it forward. That's what drives evolution. When things are off the central path, then we discover our strengths. So it's natural, and there is power in embracing your imperfections.
Yeah, I agree with that fully. And, having been so immersed in the personal growth realm, being there with Mindvalley since the beginning and seeing it expand into, what it's become today. I'm curious what you would say, speaking of the imperfections, the dark side, if you will, of personal growth and insecurities and that thrive on it and that sort of thing.
Well, thank you for the context. Yes, I am partially to blame for the way the industry had shaped. But personal growth industry is like any industry, and in any industry, it's literally a spectrum of everything. You have the light, you have the dark, you have your traps, and you have your weird people. So we like in any industry have that, and I think that one probably of the I usually would talk about imperfections in our industry when they come into the conversation, or particular imperfection. I don't have a speech per se on the imperfections of the personal growth industry, but one of them is definitely chasing perfectionism, or being a little bit too idealistic when it comes to to the good and the light and how the things are supposed to be. That definitely is one of the biggest traps of our industry. It's in fact, I have a theory that obsession with perfection actually is the source of the dark side, which later we have to face and heal.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's like, yeah, as soon as you start putting more value on something beyond where you are or what's happening, you sort of are disempowering this now moment, this current expression of divinity. I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the way it works very often is, you see, if we are obsessed with perfection, and as I also mentioned, everything light and good and how it's supposed to be, we actually focus so much on that side that we do not obtain functional skills to deal with the other side. So what happens is that there is the picture of what it means to be the best version of me, and then there's the real version of you, and usually they're a little bit different. There's a gap. It's just how it is. If you fall in love, you would have seen that happen in a relationship to another person. You fall in love with someone that, while you're in that in loveness or infatuation, you see all the good things, and you kind of close your eyes on the red flags. And then when that initial period of infatuation is over, you start seeing the person for what they are. And then you have the dilemma: are you going to love the real person, because we fall in love with an ideal, not the real person. So it's very similar to our relationship to ourselves. We idealize that best version of me, but the reality is very often different from that perfection. And now, when that gap happens, because we don't have the functional skills to deal with unpleasant, we usually don't know what to do. So, for example, if you feel an emotion which you think is beneath you, usually we don't know what to do with that emotion. For example, anger or frustration with someone you should not be feeling frustrated with, or anything where you feel that you for example, you're not feeling what you're supposed to feel in your highly evolved state of being. So usually, since we don't know what to do with that, we either dismiss it, or we brush over it, or we shove it in the dark corner, and it piles up. It's not just the emotion, obviously. It's the experiences, it's different expressions of ourselves. So everything that doesn't fit that picture of perfection, since we don't have the functional skill to deal with that, the unpleasantness, we just pile it up in the dark corner. And like in the basement, if you pile up all your junk that you don't know what to deal with, at some point you're going to have a pretty messy pile there.
Right. Yeah. And so what would you say is the best approach for someone who knows these things are lurking in the basement and aren't really sure how to start, spring cleaning, if you will?
You just triggered me on a philosophical thought about well, we all have that dark corner. Do we all know actually that there is a dark corner? And maybe some of us are not aware of that. Most of us probably have some kind of notion that there is some darkness, there's some imperfection that is there. It's just that the question is, what am I going to do? Am I going to face it? Am I going to accept that it is there, or acknowledge that it exists? Or maybe the highest form of delusion is to pretend that there is no dark side. Well, it requires quite a few skills to deal with that, but I would suggest going there and exploring what you find there.
Yeah.
Exploring with curiosity and compassion, rather than taking a big sword and try to wield it there.
Yeah. I think the best thing that we can do, as cliche as it sounds, is really approach even the shadow, even the darkness, with love and compassion, right? If you bring love to the dark corner, that's illuminating right? If darkness is the absence of light, and you bring light into that corner, it is I feel like a very powerful step towards, transmuting, integrating, and healing. Because a lot of times what I see happen is, we don't love these parts of ourselves, we judge these parts of ourselves, and then, that just creates more darkness in a sense, right?
And sometimes we insist that we have to light it up, and maybe that's not the point. Life exists of the opposites. And Ken Wilber has, in one of his lesser known works, he has this very interesting idea that it's not that only one side of the opposites is from the, whatever you believe, high power God.
Right.
Both of them originate from the same source. And there's a huge difference between the dark side, or let's say the pain, and something which is truly destructive and wrong. Very often we demonize the dark side without realizing that it carries its own value. And very often it is not bad. It's just unknown, unfamiliar.
Yeah. Well, the way I view it is, the darkness is a tool for the light to exist. If at the end of the day, the beating heart of the universe is love, which I personally believe, it's like, okay, for love to exist and mean anything, you need its opposite. You need the shadow. So it's actually a tool for love at the end of the day. Yeah, that's how I view it, and it actually, for me personally, makes sense. It really brings sense to it, because I had Neil Donald Walsh on the show not too long ago, and I asked him what was one of the most profound things that God supposedly said to him in his books, Conversations with God, and he said, "In the absence of that which you are not, that which you are is not." So if you're love in the absence of, darkness, that which you are is not, and so it's a necessary tool, I believe.
Yeah, Neil is a philosopher, so it's really, he really gives a perspective to a lot of questions. But I agree, it's necessary, but not just for contrast. Not for just for contrast, I think, but it is there for a reason. And yes, that's.
So you think it's there? You believe it's there to stand on its own volition, like darkness just has its own, it's just as valuable, in a sense, as love is what I'm hearing. Is that?
Well, love can be dark. Any emotion, if you take it to the extreme, can actually turn to be destructive. Yes, night is there for a reason. If it was only sunshine, a lot of the life on Earth would die from overexposure. So there is definitely a reason to. There are seasons, of course, not everywhere. I've lived in the tropics for a long time, but in the more northern parts of our planet, there are seasons that actually give complete the circle of life. So, there's birth, there's death, there's love, there's pain, there's light, there's dark.
And how do you think, how do you think this plays into someone's journey, someone's own personal growth journey? What does it look like for you so we're talking here about the validity of darkness. Obviously, it's very easy for people to validate love and light and unicorns and rainbows. What does it look like for someone to, from your perspective, then to embrace their dark side?
I think it's a very interesting conversation, and almost never talk about embracing the dark side to that degree and to that length and depth. But I would also say that sometimes what is so easy to embrace, we become a little bit blinded, and that becomes counterproductive. Because, for example, if you wake up in the morning and you feel and you don't feel rainbows and unicorns, insisting that you have may be very detrimental to your emotional health. So I think my message is not so much embracing the darkness, but the idea of when you stop resisting and embrace what you have, It will stop torturing you and tormenting you. I think I am misapplying, of course, Viktor Frankl's quote to some degree, but he says that pain ceases to be suffering once it's find meaning.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It yeah, it makes me think of this idea. I believe sometimes I forget where I get ideas. Like, did I come up with this? Did I read it? Did I hear it? 25 years spiritual journey. It's like I don't quite recall, but I think it might have been Eckhart Tolle where I first heard the idea that happiness isn't. A lot of people think happiness is the aim and the goal of life, right? But like we're talking about here, that is just one part of the equation. And certainly we all appreciate feeling happy, I think. Maybe some people don't. But, what as opposed to always seeking to be happy, what the idea is we maybe won't always be happy, but we can always be at peace with what is. And I think that's really powerful.
I would like to also to maybe reframe how we understand happiness, because we usually when we talk about happiness, we talk about an emotion, and emotions are not they're not constant. That's the nature of emotions, that they change. So it's interesting, though, that in psychology we have a definition of depression or anxiety. These are states. These are not emotions. These are states which can last for a long time. Yet we don't have the opposite of that. So yes, while I absolutely agree with those sayings when we talk about emotions, but I do think that humans naturally do value happiness very much. We not always prioritize it, or we're not always conscious that we prioritize, but we wish happiness. If you think of what you wish for the person that you love the most, in my case, it would be children. It's very natural to wish them to be happy. Everything else is a choice. You might wish them to be successful or to have a family, whatever. But in essence, we all wish them to be happy, and we wish the same to ourselves. The problem is that we, as a society, don't discuss happiness in serious terms. We talk about it as that emotion, like euphoria or joy, which obviously it wouldn't last. Now, if we took a page from psychology book and defined a state, which is the opposite of depression, as a state, because state is much more stable and attainable and trainable, then probably there would be something which like a state of happiness. And I would say that pain and discomfort are not something that negate that state, or it's not, they don't break that state. They can be part of that state naturally. It's like when you come out of the gym where you have exercised and your muscles hurt, objectively speaking, it's physical pain, but you don't take it like this.
Yeah,
So,
it makes me think of a friend that since childhood, a lifelong friend, and he's had a lot of like accidents in his life, a lot of like falls and things like that. And he talks about, when he has these experiences, he's found, laid out on the stretcher. One time I saw him, he tried to do a snowboarding jump that was beyond his skill set, let's say. And him laid out on the stretcher, and later talking to him, he's like, yeah, I mean, I'm in so much pain in that moment, and I'm also like accessing this like sort of blissful state simultaneously, which kind of speaks to what you're talking about, I think.
That's maybe a little bit extreme, but I think it does help to not exclude pain out of your worldview or out of your idea of a perfect life, because it's one really wonderful contemporary teacher, Susan David, she says discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And maybe we should stop avoiding it, because avoiding discomfort is actually really a slippery slope. Again, coming back to psychology, there's a very interesting theory that you cannot numb emotions selectively. If you numb anger, you numb the opposite of it. If you numb, let's say, displeasure, you numb love. So it's a very interesting thing. We are not taught, so we think that we can pick and choose, like in a buffet, and say, these are the emotions I'm going to feel, and this I refuse to feel. Well, if you refuse to feel something, even the ones that you like are going to feel less.
Interesting. That's a really interesting perspective and concept. So what is your ideal path, for someone to integrate all of these things? And maybe that's a huge question, but like, is it seeking to hack happiness, seeking to hack um pain so that you appreciate it more? Like, what would you say to someone, how to put all this together into a delicious soup?
I probably wouldn't offer a soup, just a starter. I do not know your audience well enough, of course, so I'd have to be cautious, and I will start with a starter. I think transformation starts with a very basic, fundamental skill of awareness, being aware of what's happening in your life. And that's probably the first step. Just start noticing what's going on.
Yeah.
What you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're saying to yourself, what is happening, how do you react to that? So just notice life, and that's a good start.
Yeah. Yeah, becoming the observer. You talk about in your new book, I believe, I get a list of things to potentially touch on whenever I have a guest, and I'm curious. I didn't have time to look this up, or you reference the Hermione syndrome, and I'm really
Hermione
curious.
syndrome.
Hermione syndrome. What is that?
It's just my term for, well, essentially for perfectionism, but I guess I was writing it in the stage when we were watching and reading Harry Potter with the kids, so
Gotcha.
it ended up there. It is a reference to Hermione, who's this good little girl who does everything perfect to the perfection, has really high bars. So in essence, it's very similar to perfectionism, but I prefer using Hermione syndrome because usually perfectionism is something which we attribute to women, but men have their own version of Hermione syndrome,
Right.
where they also have to have a certain image to feel good about themselves, and if they don't live up to that, they feel shame.
Yeah. That's funny. That's a good. Now that you say the name and pronounce it right, and I'm not a huge Harry Potter person, but I do recall that name. So.
Well, these British old names, they are sometimes very deceiving. They will have like 10 letters, and you pronounce 3.
Yeah. Right. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how judgment plays into this soup that we're not cooking. I often will say the level to which one judges is directly proportional to their level of ignorance. And I think and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this idea that, okay, we're talking a lot about, the up and down and left and right, the light and dark of life, the dichotomy and contrast and all these things. And where judgment, fits into that for you.
I wish it was just connected to ignorance. Then higher education would actually solve the problem of judgment. But unfortunately, there are a lot of very smart people who keep to be incredibly sarcastic. Sarcasm is also judgment in that sense, and sarcasm is actually more of a witty people's choice. But I have to give a disclaimer though, because in my book I focus on relationship with the self, not so much with the world. I do touch upon relationship with the outside world a little bit, mostly in the sense that your relationship with the world is a reflection of your relationship with the self. So when I talk about judgment, I mostly talk about self-judgment. And here, we're not as wise. In fact, a lot of the times we feel that some level of self-criticism is very good for you and very healthy. So we do tend to be quite judgmental about ourselves, especially, perfectionism. That's all about judgment.
Yeah, it's definitely the thing that slipperyest slope for most people is self-judgment. And just to clarify, I'm curious, as I talked about, judgment proportional to ignorance. The reason I say it that way is if you're judging someone, I'm not talking about ignorance in like, oh, you should know how to do trigonometry better, or you should understand like what war happened in the 1700s better and therefore would fix your judgment. I'm saying you don't understand, you're ignorant to the ultimate nature of reality and the understanding that this is all happening by divine design, and that this person that you think should be behaving a different way or acting a different way is actually in perfect divine order for their evolution and the evolutionary impact, the impact of those that they or the result of those that they are impacting. So it's like just understanding that, in my perspective, from my perspective, source, higher self, consciousness, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, it's never made a mistake. There's never been a victim in all of eternity, and it's all happening in divine design. So that's where I'm coming from when I say ignorance, not how good you are doing math problems. But so I'm curious what your thoughts are on the perfection of existence.
There's definitely ignorance in that. Since I don't believe in perfection per se, so I want to, but
Right, and we've
I
been
would.
talking a lot about that, which is interesting. It's like for me, it's like a divine dichotomy. You and I are separate, yes. You and I are one, yes. Depending from the vantage point from which we are speaking, it's a relative truth. So, from one perspective, I would say that's why I always say perfectly imperfect. It's like from one perspective, I don't believe Source has ever made a mistake, and that could be, then you could say, oh, okay, that's perfection. So it's a sort of an interesting,
But
lane to discuss.
there is definitely a level of ignorance in judging other people. It's just that maybe, in my understanding, it's at a somewhat more down to earth level. And I do not know if you've seen this wonderful movie. Well, wonderful. It's called Wonder. It's about a
Mm.
little boy. It's about a little.
I'm aware of it. Is it the one where it shows him growing up his whole life kind of thing? Is that?
It's a beautiful movie about a little boy, and it actually does show the connection of ignorance and judgment to a
Mm,
degree, but on a
mm,
different level. Not in your context, of course, in a different level.
mm-hmm,
But I think it's such a sobering movie, because you see a story of a boy and how he is hurt by objectively hurt. I mean, somebody is mean to him by his
mm-hmm,
friend,
mm-hmm,
and you not naturally start taking the side of the boy, the main
mm-hmm,
character, and
mm-hmm.
judging the other guy, until the movie unexpectedly makes a twist, and you see the story of the boy who hurt the main protagonist.
Hmm.
And then it twists again and again, and the whole movie just turns sides. It's a short period of this boy's life, but it just shows how over almost every single person who you judge at some point, once you know their story, you can't judge them anymore. And
Right.
in that case, there is a lot of connection between our ignorance of what really is happening,
Mm-hmm.
and our inclination to judge other people. I think the easiest way to describe this movie is hurt people hurt people.
Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah. It makes me think of, this concept that everyone is acting rational based off of their view of the world. Right. So,
And the experience.
mm-hmm, right.
And very often it's not because they have a bad view of the world. We are
Mm-hmm.
human
Yeah.
and imperfect.
Right. Right. So you've dealt with a lot of people, obviously, in sort of the self growth, self help, sort of personal growth industry, and I know this is something that comes up a lot where people feel they get imposter syndrome or feel. I always say on the show, I teach best what I most need to learn. And I think a certain level of the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, and humility and all those things are really, really important. And also that can go too far as well. So it's about finding that balance. So I'm curious what you think about, imposter syndrome versus egomaniac versus everything in between. How does one find their balance and, stepping into their own power as a a teacher or, personal growth person?
Well, imposter syndrome is, of course, one of those favorite topics nowadays, especially that it's so relevant to even, the business sphere. So there's a lot of research, a lot of teachers on imposter syndrome. But coming back to ignorance, I love the illustration that my teacher of physics long time ago he illustrated that like this. He said that knowledge is like an island in the ocean of ignorance,
Mm,
and the bigger your island, the more you know, the
mm-hmm,
longer the coastline, the more
mm-hmm,
you understand that you don't know. So I think
mm-hmm.
it's a really beautiful thing to remember, that the more you know, the more you realize that you do not know. And once you feel that you know everything, that's probably a scary thought.
Yeah, right.
Maybe you should increase your coastline.
Yeah, right. Yeah, 100%.
But when it comes to imposterism and and self-obsession, I guess. You said something else, but something along those lines. It is a little bit of a balance, unfortunately, and I know there's a phenomenon which I can never remember the name of, where your level of ignorance usually translates into your higher level of confidence, which is a sad thing, because there's research that says that your success depends on two things in equal measures: your competence and your confidence. There's also research that says that women seem to be much more self-critical. So a lot of the times our level of competence and our level of confidence are not in correlation. And very often you can compensate for the lack of competence with confidence, which shouldn't happen, I think. I mean, in the ideal world, but then I don't believe in perfection. So it is as it is.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a dance, I think. And you see, when I see someone who's really, well, sort of sometimes you have people with imposter syndrome who have so much to say and so much good to offer, and they're holding themselves back by this judgment or self-deprecation or whatever it is that's going on within them. And then, of course, you see the opposite, where someone is way more
They should
confident.
shut up.
Yeah.
They should shut up and stop. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And, when I see that sort of person, I'm like, oh, man, the universe is a respecter of no man. Like, someone's in for a spanking. Like, that ego is going to be dealt with and balanced. And so.
Or maybe not. Who knows? Yeah. But there are when some measures don't work, maybe you should look for other fuel. And I think when it comes to finding confidence, sometimes it's not about how much do you think you know, but it's how much do you believe in what you do. And that sometimes can compensate, because if you believe in what you do, if that's your passion, and we come back to passion now, then you will do things even if you think that you're not ready and you're not smart enough, and who am I to do that? And I think that's a good compensation.
Yeah. A lot of times people will sit on the sidelines of life waiting for the perfect entry point, and it's like, just doing something, perfect is the enemy of good enough. And when someone is so caught up on doing it it's like, I remember speaking to Matt Kahn on the show a while back, and he said, bleed on stage. And I think that's a really good approach, personally.
It's really it's really interesting, but I have no idea what it means.
It means just get out there and be willing to be imperfect. Like, grab the mic, whatever it is that you're trying to do. Don't wait to be perfect. Get out there and, be embarrassed or whatever it is. Put yourself out there, and be willing to learn, and maybe, look foolish because you weren't quite, as ready as you could have been, etc.
I would add a condition to that. You have to believe in what you do, because having been in this industry, there's enough of ignorance. There are 13 million books published every year, and a lot of that is probably maybe not as necessary. So I think the question with which you started, and I so obstinately evaded, is very important. Truly, it is important. We shouldn't take it lightly.
Yeah. I hear you. So jumping back to, pain and painful emotions, and you talk about emotional literacy and how to deal with, painful emotions healthfully. And I'm curious to hear you speak about that.
Well, I have my own theory. I like to come up with words, apparently. It looks like that.
I do too.
I suddenly realized that. So I have come up with another term. So I'll introduce you to another term. So in medical science, there's a term called congenital analgesia. And that term means that people don't feel physical pain. So it's like, as if you were on painkillers and you just don't feel anything. So people who are born with that condition, they don't survive to adulthood, which is natural. Because why do we have physical pain? It's our body's way to draw attention to those parts of the body that require your attention, in essence. Like if you touch a hot surface, you feel pain, and that makes you remove the hand. And then if you keep feeling pain, that makes you actually pay attention and heal whatever has happened there. So naturally, when kids are born with this condition, because they don't feel any pain, their bodies just deteriorate and they die.
Wow.
because they wouldn't notice diseases, they wouldn't notice wounds, nothing. So I believe that we are a little bit enamored with the idea of emotional analgesia.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, there is an interesting phenomenon that you cannot numb your emotions selectively. It's like with painkillers,
Mm-hmm.
if you inject painkillers, yes, you won't feel the toothache, but you won't feel the pleasure as well. If you come after the dentist, you would know that you wouldn't feel the sweet, for example.
Yeah, right.
So why I think it's a bad thing is because if we develop that emotional analgesia, we in essence have the same consequences. Our life will deteriorate and break
Mm,
from undetected trauma and wounds.
mm,
Any kind of emotions that we experience, they're given to us for the same reason why physical pain is given to us, or physical sensations for that matter. It's not just pain. There are pleasurable physical sensations as well. They guide our body where to go, where not to go.
yeah.
So the same with emotional experiences. Every emotion has a reason to be in your body. It usually carries information. And as we have talked, emotions are actually fluid. So the moment you experience emotion or acknowledge it or even express it, it changes.
Mm,
It moves on. It usually moves on if you hear the information that the emotion carries.
yeah.
And if you don't, if you shove it in the dark corner, if you sweep it under the rug, they actually have the tendency of accumulating. And if you want an analogy, it would be like water. If you block the flow of water, it will
Mm,
start stinking.
yep.
So the
Right.
same with emotions. So what happens is that we will then experience emotional leakage or emotional explosion.
Right.
So you know that for a very, very common example, a lot of people know that kind of expression or emotional leakage as passive aggression.
Mm,
You have
yeah.
unpleasant emotions which you don't express, but they don't disappear anywhere because you suppress them. They are going to either leak in very passive ways, or they're going to explode when you least expect. So, which is why I think it's incredibly important for us to understand how to deal with emotions, because they are there for a reason. If you know how to deal with them, they will move on. They will not stick up your body.
Right. Right. Yeah. And ultimately, morph into something worse, like disease. And um, yeah, so many of us, we look at our ancestors, our parents, grandparents, it's like it was such a common thing to bury it under the rug, right? That was the path. Like, you put this away and you keep on keeping on, because it's fascinating to me to realize that this idea of actually processing and going through emotions and facing these parts of ourselves were not that wasn't really the common practice. And I feel like it's just changing now, and it's so wild to think about.
I'm a huge fan of actually 19th century literature, especially English literature, and that was probably, the Victorian era. That was the height of how do you show that you are of noble origin? You don't show any emotion.
Right.
But with that said, it's not completely counter. How to say? Um, it's not mutually exclusive. You can that's something which people also need to understand, that you're expressing or you're feeling, not so much expressing but processing your emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and you staying civil and not mutually exclusive practices.
Yeah.
It's just that there was no discussion about emotions in, let's say, Victorian England,
Yeah.
but you can still behave incredibly civilly and politely and be healthy emotionally,
Yeah.
uh, because there's a difference. We are humans, we are not animals, and there is this little space between what you feel and how you act.
Mm.
And that space makes a huge difference. You can feel whatever you feel. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you have to act out of whatever you feel.
Yeah.
Because if we did, we'd attack food when we are hungry, we'd attack women or men when, we have other desires.
Right.
But we understand in extreme cases that this is possible. But when it comes to more mundane emotions, we very often are afraid of anger or displeasure or sadness, because we somehow think that if I'm angry, that makes me an angry person.
Right.
Or if I'm sad, or I feel sad, that means me, I'm that. that person nobody wants to be around with. So that's why I talk about emotional literacy, because there's so much which makes things much easier and clearer, and it doesn't have to be a struggle. It's all researched and discovered, and it's just science. It's not even, the question of values.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's definitely been a big part of my own journey to learn how to manage the intensity of my emotions. And yeah. And when I'm able to not react or explode over something that it feels is frustrating or an injustice or whatever, it's like so rewarding, like to retrain my nervous system to, okay, I don't do that anymore. I don't need to do that. It's like I can actually have a handle on these emotions. And I think as you're able to get them under control more effectively, you sort of level up as an individual, and it expands your ability to, I think of a life in terms of very similarly to a video game. It's like, okay, I passed that, the boss at the end of that level, and now I get to experience something beyond.
But what if you do get incensed?
What if what? Oh,
What
well,
if you do?
you know what my perspective on that is, well, the worst thing I can do is beat myself up for it, and self-loathing and all those things. What I do realize and believe wholeheartedly is I'm going to be given the opportunity to overcome that reactive state again. So it's sort of like, oh, okay, well, you're going to repeat that in some way, shape, or form. You're going to get an opportunity until you overcome, the obstacle. Let's say you're going to run it back in some way, shape, or form.
There's a big difference between certain patterns to which we react in the same ways. Like, for example, if you have a relationship with a trying family member and you keep being triggered by the same things, versus us equating emotions. Your anger towards one person, your anger towards another person might be very different, but they are in essence anger. So I think it's incredibly important, and we're coming back to the same awareness and noticing what's going on in your life. In psychology, what they suggest is that if you have an intense emotion, and I would strongly encourage you to entertain your intense emotions, there's a difference between expressing yourself or acting out of your emotion, or such a mechanism as sublimation, where you keep it at bay while you're in public, but then you express it in more productive or healthy ways. So I hope I don't scare your audience, but one of my favorite sports is kickboxing, because it really, I love to pile up all my intense emotions and carry them to the gym. So there has to be an expression of emotions, and
a healthy expression,
I'm not a huge,
right?
Or let's say not the kind that will ruin your life or your relationships, or be damaging to someone else. But I'm not a huge fan of managing emotions. I'm much more of a fan of, learning how to dance with them, because they will happen. And I think it's incredible when you can feel intense emotions. That's the sad thing. When our emotions subside, it's usually the sign of being jaded. and children are so expressive, and there's the beauty. As I said, you don't numb emotions selectively. When you can express even your anger with true passion, and I'm very passionate when it comes to, for example, the questions of justice, then usually you're capable of loving also with whole heart.
Yeah, and very good point. And to me, what I'm hearing there is like, find a healthy way to express the emotions, as opposed to like, burning down the house or something more extreme and damaging to one's life and those around them. But the other thing that I have found, there are emotions that, let's say, are negative in a sense to your biology and are doing damage. They're creating, the fight or flight sort of, the fight instinct. And what I found that is also helpful, obviously, if you're feeling emotion, don't repress it, feel it fully. But there's a point where, when you're going down the path of getting into that, let's say, super agitated state, for me, agitation has been a big thing for me to overcome. Taking the right perspective at the right moment in the escalation can actually shift the need to even go there. Like, okay, hold on, I'm going to shift my perspective here. And it's like taking a different fork in the road. So I never get to that escalated emotion. And therefore it doesn't need to be, tax my nervous system and it yeah, I don't need an outlet per se because I actually headed it off before it even began.
We're talking about behavioral patterns here again, and definitely it helps to have certain behavioral patterns, especially if you tend to be triggered by certain situations into certain intense emotions. But you said it a little earlier yourself, and that's actually, again, a page from the psychology book, that your emotion, the unpleasant emotion, is not as bad for you as the ruminating about it or being stressed about it.
Right,
A very simple analogy would be if you wake up in the middle of the night because you have insomnia. Insomnia in itself is not going to damage your body as much as you stressing about it.
right.
Because if you take purely medically, you can still have insomnia, but you can try to relax physically and focus on your breath,
Yeah.
and you'll get some benefits of the rest,
Yep.
minus the stress about not sleeping.
Sure.
Now, it's important to understand there are two levels of approach. Like in medicine, again, I like to compare our emotional body with our physical body because it makes things much more clear. So let's say if you get into an accident and you get into an ER, the doctor will first stabilize your condition. They will stop the bleeding, they'll get your vitals under control, and then they will diagnose you and they treat whatever might be the problem. Now, with emotional life, it's the same. There is the first aid level where you deal with your unpleasant emotions, and then there's the diagnosis level. So usually it's okay if you get angry, if you get scared. We get scared. I mean, that's our natural response to threat.
Sure.
What's not okay, if that becomes your pattern, if that becomes your predominant condition, or let's say as they say, it's that the background emotion. Why do a lot of people fall into anxiety, depression? Is stress becomes their background emotion that they don't even process anymore, they don't even notice, but it's constantly there.
Yeah.
So that is the dangerous thing here. It's very important to go from beyond the level of just first aid, because first aid is popping a painkiller, or putting a band-aid, but you won't put a band-aid on a broken leg.
Yeah.
So naturally, if you start noticing certain patterns in your emotional life, you have to start diagnosing and fixing the problem, the core, not the surface. So there is no problem with feeling anger per se. The problem is that if you're angry with everyone,
Yeah.
and everything triggers you, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But if you occasionally get upset with someone, well,
Yeah. It's called life.
Go do some kickboxing, write in your journal,
Right. Absolutely. Fully agree with that. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the difference between self-care and self-love.
That's, if I put it very, very simply, then when we talk about self-care, it's in nature ritualistic and a little bit superficial or surface level in a sense, because we take care of our body, of our maybe nutrition, maybe well-being. Self-love is a relationship, which is in nature not ritualistic. It's very hard to write down self-love to certain practices that you do. You can do a practice of, let's say, meditation or yoga or walking in the park, which is about self-care. Yes, self-care usually supports a good relationship with yourself, but self-love is a relationship. So it goes deeper than what you see on the surface. Now, again, since I like analogies, because analogies make it a little bit more visual, imagine a child who is born in a very wealthy family, and the child has everything the child might need: good clothes, good school, good food, good care. But the child doesn't have the attention and the presence of the parents.
Yeah.
Every sane human being would realize that child, while having all their needs met, would not be able to grow up into a happy child because they are lacking the connection, the relationship. So that's the difference between self-care and self-love. Self-care does support self-love, but it is not a guarantee.
Right.
Now, self-love usually would put you on the path of self-care.
Right.
But again, there is no yeah, and just because you take really good care of yourself is by no means the marker of you loving yourself. And in 20 years in personal growth, I've seen a lot of people who spend 100% of their effort and time on self-care, yet their relationship with themselves is absolutely miserable.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction. And self-love is, I would say really needs to be foundational. Otherwise, it's sort of, I'm putting lipstick on a pig, so to speak, and
Saddle on a cow.
Wow. Well, as we sort of wind down here, Kristina, I'd like to shift to story time. I love to hear stories, and the listeners love to hear stories of synchronicity or serendipity or positive paranormal stories. And I'd imagine you have something fun up your sleeve.
Well, I'll tell you the one story which is about ESP, in fact. But I have to give you the context for you to understand the significance of the story. So I was born and raised in Soviet Union. And Soviet Union, although they speculate that they were very much into the research on ESP, but not on the, not officially. My teacher of physics said, whatever is not explained by science doesn't exist. So I got married to Vishen, the famous founder of Mindvalley. And I moved to New York, and our first weekend as married couple. And of course, I had no interest, neither in personal growth, anything like that.
Right.
I know he was reading Neil Donald Walsh that you were talking about. In fact, yeah. I told Neil he's a little bit to blame that I kept dating Vishen, because he had like all the books, and I was like, I need to date him a little longer so that I finish the books.
That's funny. That's great.
But in general, I wasn't interested in any of that. So my first weekend as a wife in New York, and my new husband tells me, I'm sorry, I have a training to conduct. And I feel, of course, very disappointed. It's like, what do you mean training to conduct? I'm your wife.
First weekend, so come on.
He says, come with me. And it's a training on Silver Method. I don't assume that everybody knows, but it's an older method where the goal was actually to teach people ESP and intuition.
I've seen ads with Vishen talking about.
It's a wonderful method, but it's also very, very not in my worldview at that time. So I come to the training, and they do all sorts of strange ESP exercises. For example, they give me an object wrapped in some paper and tell me that I have to go on my level and say whatever I can see. And of course, I giggle like an idiot because it doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, no, I don't see anything. Don't be idiots. And then the next day, they have another exercise, and my husband says that, since you can't take it seriously, let's do it together. So he gives me a name, an age, and a location of a person that he doesn't know, but he has some information about this person. He says, close your eyes, meditate, and say what you see. And all I see is this left hand, white and ugly, and it's like in a permanent grip. That's what I say, left hand in a permanent grip, as if there was a frog that jumped out of it. And of course, he probes me, and he tries to take me on some journeys, and I say, no, that's all that I can see. And then Vishen says, the weird thing, the only information about that person on the card is that they have arthritis and their left hand is in a permanent grip.
Wow.
And that was, for me, with my background, that was like, this is the randomest thing to have seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's so cool about that is it didn't require your belief in the potential for it to work, right? No. I mean, I think anyone listening to this podcast can see you're like a strong-minded individual who definitely has their own ideas and thoughts about things. And if you weren't subscribing to the woo-woo world of ESP, and yet you did the process, it still had. I mean, that's pretty wild.
It still gives me chills because it's so inexplicable that
it's kind of, it reminds me of the beginning of my own journey, personal growth, spiritual journey, if you will, having some key moments where things happen that were just like, okay, this is like the universe trying to show me like, yes, this is real, and you should continue down this path and explore it. And I imagine that was an instrumental experience for you to shift your perspective on, this whole world of personal growth and spirituality, etc.
It must have been, but in defense of Silver Method, I must say that it also speaks to me because it has this nerdy scientific approach to things.
Yeah. I think that's helpful for a lot of people.
For a lot of people, yeah.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you, Kristina, for coming and sharing your insights and wisdom, and definitely some probing topics and conversations that we touched on. What is the best way for people to connect with you? Share please about the book and when that comes out and where they can get it.
So the book is out soon on the 13th of June, and it will be everywhere. But to connect with me, it's Kristina Mand in an Estonian way. Kristina with a K, M-A-N-D. And all my handles, my website is kristinamand.com. Everything is Kristina Mand.
Got it.
I'm everywhere, like every other author.
Yeah. What do you know?
Yeah.
Must be the internet's fault. Well,
you keep it simple, you know.
Well, Kristina, this has been such a pleasure. And I do have one final question for you. Let's see if I can get you to answer my cliche closer, which is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of life, according to Kristina Mand-Lakhiani?
I wouldn't say what's the meaning of life. I will say what's my favorite definition of happiness, because I think life is about actually enjoying the journey. Mm-hmm. So my favorite definition of happiness is happy are those people who are on a detour and can still enjoy the journey. And when it comes to, I'll tie it to life because I'm not that obstinate. My favorite definition would be probably Alan Watts's definition that it's not a destination, it's a dance. So if you combine them together, it's a dance on a detour, and can you enjoy it?
Yeah. And, this idea that life's what happens when your plans don't work out, and you don't dance to get to a certain place on the dance floor, right? You don't listen to a song to hear the final note. So, and on that note, thank you again, Kristina. It's been such a pleasure. And thank all of you for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts to another episode. Till next time, journey well.
Thank you.
I love you so, 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 so much. I love you so, 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 so